Good day, everyone. Welcome to Wheels Up Live again. I'm IAD Bound, and once again, we are back in the PMDG 777, and we are at the fabulous Flight Beam KSFO, Sierra Foxtrot Oscar. For those of you who are looking for a great add-on airport, this is by far one of the best. Okay, so in our last tutorial, we left off having completed the exterior walk around of the plane, where we got to explore, well, a lot of different things that are present on the outside of the plane and what they do and what you're looking for when you look at them, regardless of whether or not it's actually something that's simulated in the plane or not. Anyway, now we're back in the cockpit, and the next step is a pretty short one, and this is a memory flow item, not a read and do item. It's called the preliminary pre-flight procedure. This can be done by either the captain or the first officer. As a practical matter, it's going to be done most likely while the other pilot is out doing the walk around. So by the time you get back from the walk around, it would probably already be completed, maybe some other steps as well. But since, of course, in the sim it's just us, well, we're going to do the procedure. Okay. So the thing that I want to emphasize here is that this is sort of a housekeeping procedure, really. And you'll see that as we look at the steps. So, of course, we've got external power, etc. The first thing we need to do in this procedure is to turn on the ADARU. And as we saw in the second tutorial flight, when we came into the cockpit a couple of times, the ADARU button is up here on the top left. And what you want to do is go ahead and just turn it on. So, of course, when you turn it on, one, you're confirming that the on indicator is there and that the off light is extinguished, which it is. Now, as we've talked about before, the ADARU is the Air Data Inertial Reference Unit, which is part of the Air Data Inertial Reference System. And just to sort of recap some of what we saw in tutorial 2, the major components of the Air Data Inertial Reference System are the ADARU, just this unit. There is a secondary unit, which we won't talk about, the 8 air data modules, which are essentially, little computers inside the plane that are feeding data to different systems. The 6 static ports that we saw on the outside when we did the walk around, the 3 pitot probes that are on the outside, the 2 angle of attack vanes that are on the outside, and the 1 total air temperature probe that's also on the outside, as we saw. And just a reminder, the ADARU is your primary source for speed, altitude, attitude, and inertial navigation position information, which is what we're starting to align when we press the button. So essentially, the ADARU is going to process information that's being measured by the internal gyros, accelerometers, the air data module inputs, the angle of attack vane, and other systems. There's a lot going on. We couldn't possibly cover all of it, but that's just the nature of the 777. Some of the things are kind of hidden from you. Okay, so we've got that on. The next thing that we do is we're going to check the voice recorder switch. And that's right here. Now, I've noticed in looking at a number of different preliminary pre-flight procedures that different carriers may have a different voice recorder switch or none at all. I've also noticed an ELT switch on some right here. So, these things vary a bit, but normally the step is to turn it on. Okay. Well, we've got that on then. Okay, the next thing you'd be looking at is maintenance documents. And so we don't have those, obviously, but you might be looking at your minimum equipment list. You'd be looking at anything that's in-op for your flight, looking at the maintenance logs or other logs to see what previous pilots have said or what maintenance might have put in their notes that they have on the condition of the plane. And I suppose if there was something you had a particular concern about as the pilot that you were seeing in the logs and thought, I want maintenance to look at this before we leave, you might call them. Okay, but along those same lines, we are now going to look at some status information to make sure that we're meeting the basic requirements for certain systems before we can dispatch. So I've brought us over here to start with, apologies for that, start with the status page. Okay, and as you can see, I went to the DSP and I clicked on Stat to get the status page, and we'll come down here and have a look at it. All right, the first item we have is the hydraulic fluid. Now, when you look at the quantity, I want to note here, this is not a volume measurement. You know, it's not a quart or a liter or something along those lines. What you're looking at is a percentage figure. If 1 equals 100% of the hydraulic quantity, then you're full up. We have 95%, 96%. Now, you might be asking, okay, what's too low? Well, the system will tell you. So if there is a low quantity message, that would tell you, and it would be in amber, and it would say LO here. That's something, obviously, that would be of concern, particularly if you're in flight, but if you're on the ground, it's a case where you need to definitely refill because you're below the operating parameters. Around 0.72, you should get a message somewhere in that neighborhood that says RF next to the figure, and that's telling you it needs to be refilled. You may also see, although I think it's unlikely in the sim, an OF message somewhere maybe at 1.02 or more saying you're overfilled. Okay, what if you do have one of the messages? Well, one of the things that I would tell you at that point is look at your PMDG panel state, try loading another one, see if you get something different, because if you're getting this when you're just starting up the plane from cold and dark, there's probably something wrong with it, unless perhaps you've been tracking fluid quantities for the same livery for some time. But I am using a custom panel state here. It's not very complicated. It's just the cold and dark with a few tweaks, the biggest one being that the ground power unit is connected when you start it up. But anyway, that's something you want to look at. Now, if you do need to refill it, you come into FS Actions and you go to ground maintenance and you can refill the hydraulic fluid. You can also refill the engine oil. And in fact, there's a number of things you can do here. You know, brake service, tire service, etc. Okay. The next thing you want to check is the pressure for the crew oxygen, which we can see is at 1840. That's plenty. Just to give you an example, I was looking up what some of the limitations are, and apparently there's more than one oxygen system that might be in the plane in terms of the format that it uses or style. As far as I can tell, you could take off with pretty most anything above 1200 with maybe a few exceptions. The most that I saw was for one particular style of the oxygen system, and if you had 4 pilots, and so this would be a real long haul, that were relying on it, you needed to have at least 1333 in here. But at 1840 we have more than enough. Okay, now we need to check the engine oil. So I've clicked on engine up on the DSP, and you can see we have oil quantity here. Now, this one is a measure and not a percentage. This is quarts, and the requirement that I have identified as your limit is you need to have at least 18 quarts for takeoff. If you don't, get it refilled. Okay, The next thing you'd be looking for is that the gear pins are stowed. I don't believe PMDG has the gear pins modeled, so you won't be seeing that. The next thing we would do is go to the overhead maintenance panel, and this is the one that's all the way back above your head. So if you're walking into the cockpit door, it's not far from there. And what you want to do is make sure all of these guards are closed. And then on the cargo temp select, now in general you'll see as needed, but as the where to set it as needed. But I think in the scheme of things, as I understand it, most of the time the load masters are setting these, depending on if there's special cargo that needs different settings. Okay, similar idea in the freighters as well, by the way. So let me add to that while we're up here. You need to check the circuit breakers, but again, PMDG isn't modeling the circuit breakers, so okay, moving on. There's nothing to see here, so to speak. All right, then you'd want to double check that we have all of our emergency equipment. Again, this is not really modeled in the sim. In other words, you're not going to actually use any of the emergency equipment, but if you're curious, you can take a little look around. And indeed, there are a few things sort of modeled here. We've got a fire extinguisher, we have a crash axe, we've got the emergency escape rope. Storage area is shown here, although you can't open it or access it, but it's there if you want to look at it. Now, another thing that you would do, or seems to be indicated in most of these preliminary pre-flight procedures, is that you would test the PA system, but again, we can't do that. Other variations that I've seen, just as a kind of reference point, well, some people have the pilot or first officer initializing the ACAR system, just going through some steps they might have for various company procedures. But this preliminary pre-flight that I've done, which by the way we're at the end of, it's pretty straightforward. There's not a lot going on here. The big thing that you're doing is turning on the ADARU and double checking the status page for your oxygen pressure, your hydraulic quantity, and then checking the engine page for your engine oil quantity. In our next tutorial, we are going to do the CDU pre-flight procedure, and the CDU is the control display unit here, and we're going to start working on getting a flight plan in. And that's going to be a fun one. We're going to delve deep into sort of the Boeing approach. We're going to manually enter a flight plan, which, by the way, is going to be from San Francisco to Denver. And we're also going to do more of an automated import of a flight plan from SimBrief, which PMDG lets you do. So I think that'll be an interesting one, and hopefully you'll come and check that out in tutorial 4. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe. In both cases, it helps me understand kind of who's out there. And if you have questions, feel free to post them in the comment section below. You can also find me on Discord. I'm a moderator in the PMDG Discord, so that's one place you can find me, but I'm in a number of flight sim related channels, so if you have questions, please come and ask. And thank you all for watching.